The lights of the alien hospital shone like silver rivers across the wide corridor. Dr. Varric moved quickly through the hall, his four thin legs clicking against the crystal floor as he checked the incoming emergency list on the glowing panel in his hands. Most cases tonight were simple: broken limbs, mild infections, energy burns, nothing unusual for a medical station that served dozens of species across this sector. But then a red symbol flashed at the top of the list: Emergency Priority 1. Varric slowed, his two large eyes narrowing as he read the words. Unknown species, critical condition, shuttle en route, life signs unstable. Unknown species meant trouble. Unknown species meant strange anatomy, strange reactions to medicine, strange problems that no one had seen before. He turned sharply into the main arrival bay, already calling to his assistant nurse, a tall, thin being named Cyril with skin that shimmered blue under the lights. Prepare the trauma chamber, full bioscan, full containment. Cyril nodded and ran ahead, the scent of antiseptic filling the air. The outer doors opened with a deep metallic hum. A battered medical shuttle floated inside, its hull scorched and dented as if it had been through a war zone. Two station guards rushed forward carrying a stretcher. On it lay a figure unlike anything Varric had ever seen. Tall, broad in the shoulders, with strange pale skin that was cracked and burned in places. The figure wore torn armor that looked like metal fused with fabric, melted and twisted from heat far beyond safe levels. One arm hung limp, the other was clenched tight. The face was strange: small eyes, small nose, and a thin mouth set in a grim line. Blood, dark red blood, ran down the side of the face. Varric felt a strange pull in his mind. This creature looked fragile, too soft for survival, and yet it was still breathing. He stepped closer. Species. The guard looked at his wrist display. Human. Varric blinked. He had heard the word only once, in an old archive entry that most scientists called exaggerated myth. A predatory mammal from a distant death world, rumored to be dangerous, stubborn, and unpredictable. But that was just a story. Now one lay before him, dying or perhaps already beyond saving. Move it to Chamber 3, he ordered. As they wheeled the human into the trauma room, the air filled with the sharp hum of scanners and the hiss of sterile fields activating. The chamber walls glowed with soft green light as the auto-surgeon prepared for work. Varric studied the readings on the screen and froze. The heart rate was high but steady. The blood oxygen was low but climbing. This was impossible. Exposure to the plasma burns recorded in the injury report should have destroyed the vascular system instantly. Even a Kareth, known for their triple-layered skin, would not survive more than 2 minutes. And yet, this human had been in transit for nearly an hour. Cyril moved to clean the wounds, but the moment the antiseptic touched the skin, the human stirred. Eyes opened. They were not the soft, unfocused eyes of the dying. They were sharp, alive, filled with something Varric could not name. The human's lips moved. Where, ship? Varric leaned closer. You are in medical care. You must stay still. The human's head turned slightly, scanning the room as if measuring exits and threats. Varric had seen soldiers from many species, but never one who woke from near death with such alertness. We need to operate, Varric said. The human gave a slow nod, then closed his eyes again. Varric took a breath. Scalpel field ready, he told the auto-surgeon. The machine's arms extended, each holding fine instruments that glowed with faint blue energy. As the first incision was made, Varric expected to see the skin split easily. Instead, it resisted. It was as if the flesh had reinforced itself like organic armor. The energy blade wavered for a moment before finally cutting through. Beneath, the muscle fibers twisted and tightened. They looked denser than any mammal tissue Varric had ever seen. Cyril's voice trembled. Doctor, it's like the tissue is fighting back. Varric nodded slowly. He had operated on soldiers of the Creel, whose skin could harden during combat. But this was different. The human's body was reacting to the injury as if trying to rebuild itself while under the knife. Every time the blade moved, the tissue closed slightly behind it. The patient should have been unconscious under the pain suppressants. Yet, as Varric worked, the human groaned quietly, teeth clenched. Varric glanced at the vitals again. Pain levels extreme, neural signals firing at dangerous speeds. This creature should have gone into shock. Instead, the readings were climbing higher. It was like watching a dying sun burn hotter instead of fading. He felt something close to fear. What kind of world created a body like this? The surgery dragged on, the human's heartbeat never faltering. Varric removed melted armor fragments from the chest cavity, carefully sealing ruptured vessels. With each step, he found more signs of impossible resilience. Cells dividing faster than the healing stimulants could explain, tissue knitting without assistance. By the time he sealed the final wound, the autosurgeon's report read 90% tissue stability. That was unheard of for fresh trauma. The human's breathing slowed, but remained strong. Varric stepped back, his hands trembling. He had seen survivors, he had saved lives from the edge, but this was different. This was not survival as he knew it. This was something else. Cyril whispered, "Doctor, what is it?" Varric stared at the pale face on the table. It is a question we may not want the answer to. The chamber's lights dimmed slightly as the sterilization cycle began. Varric knew the next hours would be critical. If the human lived through the night, it would defy every law of medicine he had learned. He also knew something else. This patient, this so-called human, was not ordinary, and whatever had brought him here might be far from over. As he left the chamber, the hum of the monitors followed him, steady, relentless, like the heartbeat of something ancient and unstoppable. Outside in the corridor, the guards spoke quietly to one another. Varric caught fragments of their words. Destroyed ship, unknown attackers, no other survivors. He kept walking. Already his mind was turning over the possibilities. Unknown species meant unknown limits, and sometimes unknown dangers. But deep inside, another thought pressed forward. If this human could survive what no other could, what else could he do? Back in the trauma room, the human's fingers twitched. A faint murmur escaped his lips. Not words Varric understood, but the tone was clear. This was not surrender. This was a promise. The kind that could change the fate of more than just one life. The night outside the station was silent, filled with the endless black of space. But inside, something had begun that no one in the galaxy was ready for. And Varric, despite every lesson in caution, could not help but feel the cold spark of curiosity burn brighter than fear. The human was still breathing, still alive, still refusing to give in, and the doctor knew he would have to see how far this strange will to live could go. The lights above the recovery bay were soft and warm, designed to calm the mind of any patient who woke there. Most species relaxed under the golden glow, their bodies easing into the comfort of safety. But when a human opened his eyes, the effect was different. He did not look calm. He looked alert, sharp, as if every muscle was waiting for danger. Dr. Varric stood at the edge of the bed, scanning the human's vitals once again. What he saw made no sense. The heart rate was strong, steady, and even rising slightly as the human's awareness returned. That should not happen after such trauma. It should fall into rest mode as the body worked to heal. Instead, this human's body seemed to be gathering energy like a storm. The burns along his arms had already changed in color, the raw red fading into a deep pink. Varric had never seen such quick tissue regeneration. He touched the side of his panel and whispered for Cyril to bring the portable nanoblade set. The nurse hurried in, carrying the case, her blue skin shimmering with nervous energy. Varric explained that he wanted to test the density of the tissue to see if the readings from surgery were accurate. The human watched them without speaking, his gaze following every move. With a careful motion, Varric pressed the smallest of the nanoblades against the edge of a burn. It slid a fraction of a centimeter in before meeting resistance. This was not scar tissue. This was living muscle resisting the blade, as though it understood the threat. Varric felt a cold shiver pass through his arms. He had studied hundreds of species, from the crystal-bodied Vornak to the liquid-skinned Seraph. None had a reaction like this. The human inhaled sharply, but instead of pulling away, he kept still. His voice was rough when he spoke. "That tickles." The words were strange, but the tone was not one of pain. It was almost mocking. Varric glanced at Cyril, who looked back wide-eyed. This was not a normal patient. This was not a normal situation. The medical AI in the corner beeped a warning. Pain response detected at 100%, neural strain approaching critical. Varric stared at the readings. This was beyond logic. Any other being would have fainted minutes ago. But the human's mind was still clear, still locked onto them with unblinking focus. He pulled the nanoblade back and stepped away. Cyril whispered, "Doctor, his body is doing something strange." Varric nodded, his mind already racing. They moved to the secondary console and began running a deep scan of cellular activity. The image on the screen lit up with glowing red threads. These were new cell formations, building across damaged areas at a speed far faster than any stimulant could explain. It was as if the human's body had switched into a state designed for survival above all else. Varric had heard ancient rumors of combat modes in certain predator species, but never seen one in real time. He leaned closer to the human. "What is your home world like?" The human's mouth curved into a tired half-smile. "Home, it's not for everyone." That was all he said, and it was enough to leave more questions than answers. Varric decided to run another test, this time one the patient would not notice. He ordered the room to increase oxygen flow by 20%. Most species would react with mild euphoria or dizziness, but the human's vitals shifted instantly. The heartbeat slowed slightly, the breathing deepened, and the neural activity increased as if his brain was using the extra oxygen as fuel. Then Varric ordered the chamber temperature to drop by 10 degrees in under 30 seconds. The human skin prickled, but there was no shivering. Instead, his muscles contracted slightly as if storing warmth. Varric raised the temperature by 20 degrees to see the opposite effect. Sweat formed along the human's brow, but his breathing and heart rate barely changed. The medical AI reported adaptation efficiency at maximum, estimated adjustment time 0.8 seconds. That number made Varric grip the console tighter. Every species in the known records required minutes or even hours to adapt to such environmental swings. This human did it instantly. The human opened his eyes again and looked straight at Varric. "You're testing me." It was not a question. Varric hesitated before answering. "I'm trying to understand you." The human closed his eyes briefly, then opened them with a look that was not anger, but something deeper, something unreadable. "And if you understand me, what then?" Varric did not have a clear answer. He had thought his work was about saving lives, but now he wondered if he was standing at the edge of something much larger. A life form like this could survive where others could not, could endure what others would flee. He thought about the battles raging in distant systems, the colonies on hostile worlds, the countless lives lost to environments too cruel for normal biology. A species like this could change everything. The human shifted slightly, wincing at the movement, but not stopping. Varric noticed his hand gripping the bed frame, muscles tense. Even in pain, he was ready to act, ready to move. The door to the recovery bay slid open, and one of the station guards stepped in, his armor still carrying scorch marks from the mission that had brought the human in. "Doctor," the wreckage report came through. Varric waved him closer. The guard's voice was low. It was a heavy cruiser, human design, took multiple direct plasma hits, hull breached in 5 sectors. No other survivors. Varric glanced at the human, who stared back with no sign of surprise. "You knew," Varric said softly. The human gave a single slow nod. "Then why are you still alive?" The answer was simple. "Because I have to be." The words hung in the air, carrying a weight that Varric could not measure. There was no arrogance in them, only fact, as if survival was not a matter of luck or chance, but a rule the human followed without question. Varric looked back at the scans, still running, watching the glowing threads of new life weaving themselves through damaged flesh. It was unlike anything in his medical knowledge. He felt as if he was watching the galaxy itself write a new law right in front of him. Cyril came forward with fresh readings, her voice shaking. "Doctor, if the rate continues like this, the patient will be fully mobile in less than 2 standard days. 2 days after injuries that should have ended him within minutes." Varric realized he was gripping the console so tightly his knuckles were pale. This was not just resilience. This was defiance against every natural limit. The human leaned back in a bed, his gaze fixed on the ceiling. He spoke quietly, but his voice carried across the room. "You want to know what makes us different?" Varric waited. "We don't stop." It was the kind of statement that could sound like bravado, but here in this room, from this patient, it felt like a simple truth. Varric turned to Cyril. "Prepare additional monitoring. Round the clock. No one enters without clearance." She nodded quickly, sensing the importance. The human closed his eyes again, his breathing steady, his body still healing in ways that seemed impossible. Varric stood there for a long moment, watching. He did not know if he was looking at a miracle or a threat, but he knew one thing. This was only the beginning. The soft hum of the medical machines filled the recovery bay with a constant low vibration that seemed to settle into the bones. Dr. Varric stood near the observation window, watching the human lie still on the bed. The man's chest rose and fell with steady rhythm, and each breath seemed almost too strong for someone who had been at death's edge only hours before. Cyril stood beside him, holding a data tablet covered with bright symbols and shifting graphs. She whispered that the readings were still climbing, not falling. "That should not happen," she said. "Not in any species we know." Varric nodded, but said nothing, his mind already racing through every archive entry on record. He had read about species that could heal quickly, some even regrowing limbs, but all of them needed special conditions or long periods of rest. This human was different. He was recovering while awake, even speaking at times. It went against the entire foundation of biological recovery. Varric decided he needed answers directly from the source. He stepped into the room, and the human's eyes followed him at once. There was no haze, no confusion, only awareness that was almost unnerving. Varric asked how he was feeling. "Better than I should," the human replied, his voice still rough but steady. "Better than you should," Varric repeated. "Yes, much better." He hesitated before asking what kind of world the human came from. The man gave a faint smile, but did not answer right away. Instead, he asked where his ship was. Varric told him it was gone, destroyed, no other survivors. The human closed his eyes for a moment, the muscles in his jaw tightening. Then he opened them again and said, "We have been through worse." Varric tilted his head. "Worse than losing an entire ship and crew." The man did not explain, only looked at him with an expression that was both calm and heavy. Varric felt the weight of that look in his chest. He turned back to the console and brought up the medical scans from earlier. The images showed layers of tissue that looked almost metallic in structure under certain wavelengths. He asked the human if his body had been altered or engineered. The man shook his head slowly. "No, this is natural." "Natural," Varric repeated quietly. That word carried a strange edge, because what he was seeing did not feel natural. It felt like the result of design or adaptation pushed beyond reason. Cyril entered the room carrying a tray with nutrient solution. She offered it to the human, who took it without hesitation and drank it in long, steady pulls. When he was done, he handed it back with a simple thank you. Even his voice sounded stronger. Varric asked if humans had other abilities like this. The man smirked slightly and said, "You could say that." Varric pressed further. "What do you mean?" The human only replied, "Our history is not easy to believe." That was not enough for Varric. He activated his wrist panel and accessed the galactic data net. He searched for all available records on humans. Most were fragments, scattered reports from long ago. One described humans as adaptable predators, another as reckless explorers, another as violent and unpredictable. Some claimed they could survive environments that would kill others instantly. Others dismissed them as myth entirely. Varric felt a spark of frustration. He was a scientist and a healer, and he needed facts, not stories. He asked the human again about his home world. The man finally answered, Earth. Varric repeated the name softly. The human nodded. It is a place where the weather can kill you, where the ground moves and the sea can rise to swallow whole cities, where animals hunt you and the air itself can turn against you. We grew up in danger and we learned to live with it. Varric felt a slow, cold realization forming. A species born in constant danger would evolve to survive anything. He looked at the scans again, and it was as if the pieces began to fit. This body was not built for comfort. It was built for survival at any cost. Cyril glanced at the human with a mix of fear and fascination. She whispered to Varric that perhaps the man was telling the truth. Varric nodded slowly, but truth was not the same as understanding. He wanted to know how far these abilities could go. How much could a human endure before breaking? The medical AI reported another increase in muscle density and bone strength. It was happening while the man simply sat there. The doctor felt as though he was watching a storm gather strength while standing in its path. The human shifted his position, sitting up slightly despite the restraints meant to keep patients still. He asked if he could walk. Varric told him no, he needed a rest. The man gave a quiet laugh, not mocking, just amused. Humans do not rest if they do not have to, he said. Varric knew he could order sedation, but part of him wanted to see what would happen next. The human placed his feet on the floor slowly. Muscles in his legs tightened as if testing each movement. Then he stood, not with the weakness of someone recovering from trauma, but with the steady balance of a trained soldier. Cyril gasped. Varric checked the vitals. They were steady, even strong. The human looked around the room, scanning each corner as if mapping it in his mind. Varric asked what he was doing. The man replied, Old habit. Always know where you are and how to leave. That response carried the weight of long experience in dangerous places. Varric felt a strange pull of respect mixed with unease. This was no ordinary patient. This was a survivor in every sense. He asked again about Earth's dangers. The human listed storms that tore cities apart, mountains that spat fire, cold that froze seas, heat that killed in hours, animals with teeth the size of knives, and humans fighting humans in wars for thousands of years. Every word painted a picture of a world that was more dangerous than any Varric had studied. Cyril whispered that no wonder they were like this. Varric agreed, but said nothing. The human sat back down on the bed, still restless but willing to stay for now. Varric returned to the console and began compiling all this into a report. Part of him knew this report would draw attention, maybe even the interest of the Galactic Council. Another part warned him that attention might not be a good thing. He glanced once more at the human. The man met his gaze, and there was a spark there, not of threat, but of something deeper. Something that told Varric that this was only the beginning of the questions, and that the answers might not be safe for anyone. The station was quiet in the deep hours of the cycle, when most patients slept and the medical wing lights dimmed to a soft blue glow. Dr. Varric stood alone at the console outside the human's chamber, his eyes fixed on the shifting data streams. Each line told the same impossible story. The patient was not only healing, but improving. Bone density was higher than baseline recorded at arrival, muscle fibers thicker, reflex speed faster. It was as if the trauma had pushed the human into some hidden mode. Varric knew the Council Science Division would demand proof if he sent them a report, so he decided to gather that proof himself. Not with questions that could be dodged, but with tests that could not be faked. He called Cyril to join him and explained that they would run a series of environmental changes to measure the human's adaptability. Cyril hesitated, saying that the patient was still in recovery. Varric replied that recovery might not mean the same thing for the species. They began by adjusting the atmosphere mixture, increasing the oxygen content by 30% over 2 minutes. The human lay still at first, eyes closed, then his breathing shifted, becoming deeper and slower. Neural scans showed a surge in brain activity as though the extra oxygen was being turned into fuel for thought. Varric noted every reading carefully. Next, they lowered the oxygen level to what would make most species dizzy within seconds. The human's pulse quickened slightly, but stabilized again, as if his body had switched to another method of keeping itself alive. Cyril whispered that it was like watching a machine adjust settings automatically. Varric nodded without looking away from the data. He moved to the next test, temperature variance. The chamber's air chilled rapidly, frost forming along the edges of the wall panels. The human skin reacted, small bumps appearing along the arms, muscles tensing to preserve heat. Yet there was no trembling or loss of coordination. Then Varric ordered the chamber to heat sharply to levels that would exhaust most patients. Sweat formed across the human's brow, but his vital signs stayed within perfect range. It was as if his body ignored the environment and forced the surroundings to match him instead. Cyril's voice was almost a whisper when she said, "This is not possible." Varric agreed, but his hands kept moving, setting the next stage. Physical stress. He engaged the low gravity setting, then quickly raised it to 1.5 times normal station gravity. The human opened his eyes and looked directly at Varric. "Test me again." Varric admitted it. "Yes." The human smirked faintly and sat up without apparent strain, despite the heavier gravity pressing against him. He swung his legs over the bed and stood, moving with steady balance. Varric instructed him to walk across the chamber. The human obeyed, his steps sure and measured. Then he stopped and asked if that was all. Varric felt an odd mix of scientific excitement and personal unease. No patient had ever handled these changes without at least some sign of discomfort. He decided to push further. He ordered the chamber's light levels to shift rapidly from total darkness to blinding brightness and back again. The human's pupils adjusted instantly, never once showing signs of delay or pain. Varric made notes faster than his console could log them. Then he gave the order for the final test, a combination of all previous changes. Oxygen shifts, temperature swings, gravity increase, and rapid light cycling. Cyril glanced at him with wide eyes, but followed the command. The chamber's systems roared to life as conditions changed every few seconds. The human moved slowly at first, as if feeling each change, then began to adapt faster. Within less than a minute, he was walking smoothly as though nothing was happening at all. Varric finally ordered the systems back to normal. The human looked at him and said in a calm voice, "You cannot measure what we are with machines alone." Varric asked what he meant. The human replied, "Machines can tell you my body adjusts. They cannot tell you why I refuse to stop." There was no boast in the words, only truth spoken as if it was a fact of life. Varric felt the weight of that statement deep in his mind. He wondered if the real strength of this species was not just in their biology, but in something far less measurable. Cyril brought forward the latest readings, her hands trembling. The graphs showed no sign of strain anywhere in the human systems. In fact, they were stronger now than when the tests had begun. Varric stepped closer to the bed and looked the man in the eyes. "Tell me what could stop you." The human's answer was simple. "Nothing until I am dead." It was a chilling truth said without aggression. Varric turned away, unsure if he should feel admiration or fear. He ended the test for the cycle, but made a private record of every result, encrypting it so that only he could access it. He knew that if these findings became public too, soon the galaxy would not react with calm curiosity. The human's abilities would be seen as a weapon. The station outside remained quiet, but Varric felt as if they were standing at the edge of something vast and dangerous. He told Cyril to monitor the human constantly and to wake him if anything unusual happened. She nodded, though her eyes betrayed her unease. As Varric left the chamber, the human leaned back on the bed. But even in apparent rest, there was no sign of true relaxation. The man's gaze followed him until the door closed. Varric walked the corridor in silence. He thought of every species that had tried to claim dominance in the galaxy, and how all had limits. Then he thought of this human who had not yet shown any. It was a thought that would not let him sleep that night. And somewhere deep inside, he knew the real test had not yet begun. The alien doctor stood in the middle of the medical bay staring at the human who was still breathing against all reason. And the doctor felt that the truth was close, but the truth was something far stranger than any medical record could explain, because the more the doctor looked, the more the doctor saw that the human's body was doing things no other living creature could ever do on this station, and maybe not in the entire galaxy, because the human skin was knitting itself together faster than the auto-repair nanobots could even react, and the alien doctor could see with his own eyes that the human's pulse was beating strong and steady despite wounds that had bled half the life out of any other species before even the first treatment began. The doctor moved closer and ran the scanner again, expecting to see a normal healing pattern, but instead the device showed spikes of strange energy running through the human's nerves and muscles, and even through the bone, and the alien doctor thought that maybe the human was generating this energy in the same way some creatures on distant worlds produce light or heat, but the readings were far higher than any safe biological level, and yet the human's body seemed not only unharmed, but actually improved by it, as if the energy was the very thing keeping the human alive. Commander Varen entered the bay, his eyes narrowing, as he saw the human still awake and even trying to sit up despite the bandages and the restraints, and the commander's voice was sharp as he asked the doctor why the patient was still not sedated and resting, because the station's regulations required that any critical case must remain under strict observation, but the doctor replied that sedation might interfere with whatever process was happening inside the human, and that if they sedated him, they might lose the one chance to understand how this strange life was being sustained. The human's breathing was deep and slow, and his eyes scanned the room like a soldier on guard duty, and Varen could feel the tension building in the air because this human looked like he was ready to stand up and fight even now, and that thought made the commander's spines twitch, because in his own species such readiness after trauma was impossible. Yet here was a creature who had bled and broken, yet still seemed ready to challenge the galaxy if it dared to come closer. The doctor adjusted the medbed sensors, and a new reading appeared on the screen showing that the human's body temperature was rising far above normal for his species, and yet he showed no signs of heat distress, no sweating, no confusion, no weakness, only more strength and sharper focus. And the doctor began to suspect that the human's body was entering some kind of survival mode that rewrote the rules of biology for the sake of keeping the host alive. Outside the medical bay, the station corridors were silent, but the news of the human survival had already begun to spread through the crew, and whispers ran through the different alien species who served here, and some spoke of old stories they had heard about human stories that sounded like legends or myths told around dim fire pits about creatures from the edge of the stars who refused to die no matter what was done to them, and some remembered stories of human soldiers who kept fighting even after being injured in ways no one could explain. The doctor leaned closer to the human and asked softly if he could remember what happened before he arrived here, and the human's gaze locked on the doctor with an intensity that made even the alien's cold blood feel warmer, and the human said in a slow voice that he had been caught in the middle of a plasma explosion that tore through his unit, and that he had seen the blast consume everything and everyone, and he had felt the heat sear through his own flesh, but he had refused to stop moving, because stopping meant dying, and dying was not an option, not when there were still others depending on him to reach safety. The doctor listened, carefully noting that the human spoke with no hesitation and no sign of trauma, in his voice only a steady calm like the kind found in someone who had faced death before and learned to push it aside, and the doctor wondered if this mental strength was part of the secret, because maybe the mind itself could drive the body to survive when all other systems said it was over. Varen stepped closer to the bed and asked the human why he fought so hard to live when most species accepted their fate when the end came, and the human's eyes narrowed, and he replied that in his culture you do not stop until every breath has been spent, and even then you fight for one more, and Varen felt a strange shiver run through him, because he knew in that moment that the human was not speaking in metaphor, but in absolute truth. The medical bay lights dimmed as the station switched to night cycle, but no one in the room moved to rest because the human's condition was still too strange to ignore, and the doctor began another scan using deep tissue resonance, and the images revealed something that froze him in place, because the human's bone marrow was glowing faintly as if tiny sparks of energy were being created there and traveling through the bloodstream, and this energy was repairing cells faster than the fastest known, healing serums in the galaxy. The doctor called up every known medical database, but found nothing to match these readings, and he began to think that maybe humans carried within them a hidden system that only activated in moments of extreme, dangerous system so efficient and so powerful that it could make them nearly unkillable for a short time. And if that was true, it meant humans were far more dangerous than most civilizations had ever guessed. Varen seemed to sense the doctor's thoughts, and asked if this meant humans could become unstoppable warriors in the right conditions, and the doctor answered slowly that perhaps they already were, and that history might simply have chosen to forget or ignore it, because the truth would be too unsettling for the galaxy to accept. The human shifted on the bed, and the restraints creaked as his muscles tightened, and he looked at the commander and the doctor with eyes that were calm, but burning with something unspoken, and he said that if they were done staring at him, he would like to stand, because lying still was making him feel like he was dying faster, and before either of them could argue, the human pushed himself upright, the bandages stretching and the monitors screaming in alarm, but his body holding steady. The doctor reached to stop him, but Varen raised a hand away, because he too wanted to see how far this human could go, and in that moment the air in the medical bay felt heavy like the space before a storm, and everyone present knew that whatever this human was about to do would change the way they thought about his kind forever. The human swung his legs over the side of the bed, his bare feet touching the cold floor, and instead of wobbling or leaning for support, he stood straight, his shoulders squared, his breathing strong, and the alien doctor stared in disbelief, because every chart, every scan, every law of biology said this man should be unconscious if not dead. Yet here, he was standing like a soldier ready for the next order, and the truth hit the doctor like a shock that perhaps this was only the beginning of understanding what a human could endure. The ship drifted in the cold space like a wounded beast, its hull groaning under the stress of old wounds, and new damage lights flickered along the corridors, casting strange shadows on the walls. In the middle of it all, the alien doctor moved quickly, his hands clutching a small scanner that beeped softly every few seconds. He followed the sound deeper into med bay, where the human lay on a narrow bed, his chest rising and falling slowly as if every breath was a fight for survival. The doctor had never seen such a thing, and the strangeness of it both frightened and fascinated him, for he knew this man should have been dead hours ago. Around the bed, a few alien nurses stood, their eyes wide, and their voices low, speaking in their own tongue about the impossible nature of what they were seeing. They had treated countless species from every corner of the known systems, and they all knew the limits of life and the cruel way injuries claimed it. Yet this human defied every single rule they had learned in their years of practice and training. The doctor placed the scanner over the human's chest again, and the readings made no sense. All organs that should have failed were somehow still functioning, blood that should have stopped flowing was still pushing through the veins, and a mind that should have gone silent was still sending signals strong enough to show on the monitors. The human's eyes opened for a moment, only half focused, and the doctor leaned closer, trying to hear the faint words that formed on a man's lips. There was no fear, there only a strange calm, and something deeper, something like a stubborn refusal to let go. The words were soft, but they carried a weight the doctor could feel in his bones, and then the human's eyes closed again, as if saving strength for some battle being fought far away inside. Outside the med bay, the ship shook as distant weapons fire echoed through the hull, and the crew hurried to keep systems alive. The war had not yet ended, and they all knew the danger was still real and near. But inside this room, the doctor's focus never left the human, for he felt as if he was staring at the key to some great secret, a truth that no one had guessed until now. He had read about human resilience in the archives, but those were just dry reports of soldiers surviving longer than expected, or workers enduring harsh worlds. Yet seeing it with his own eyes was something entirely different. It was raw and real, and beyond anything the data could prepare him for. The nurses brought fresh supplies, and the doctor began a careful operation to remove the last fragments of metal lodged in the human's side, his hands steady even as the ship trembled now, and then he could feel the heat of the human's blood against his gloves, and it reminded him of stories told by older doctors of how human blood clotted faster than almost any other species, and how their bodies could force healing even when everything else said it was impossible. He worked without pause because he knew any delay might tip the balance, and when at last the final piece of shrapnel came free, he looked at the monitors again, expecting to see a drop in vital signs. Instead, he saw the opposite: the human's heartbeat stronger than before. He turned to the nurses and ordered them to prepare nutrient fluids and oxygen infusion. The alien crew could not understand why this patient was worth such effort, but they obeyed, for the doctor's word was law in the med bay. As the hours passed, the human's breathing became steadier, and the color returned to his skin, and the doctor felt something inside him shift, a quiet certainty that this was no ordinary patient. This was proof of something that might change how the galaxy saw humans forever. The sound of boots echoed in the corridor, and the captain entered the med bay, his face set in the grim lines of someone who had seen too much war. He glanced at the human, and then at the doctor, asking if the man would live. The doctor hesitated for a moment, then said he believed so, though it defied every medical fact. He knew. The captain gave a short nod, but his eyes lingered on the human for a long moment before he turned to leave. Perhaps he, too, understood the weight of what was happening here. Later, as the ship moved into safer space, the doctor found himself sitting beside the human's bed, watching the slow rise and fall of his chest, and wondering what kept him alive. He thought about the pain the man must be feeling and how his mind must be fighting every moment to hold on to life. And yet there was no sign of surrender. He had seen warriors of his own species fade away with lesser wounds, but this man clung to existence like a climber, hanging from the last ledge above a dark abyss. The human stirred again, opening his eyes just enough to meet the doctor's gaze. There was a faint smile, then words spoken in a weak but steady voice that said, "It takes more than this to stop me." The doctor almost laughed, though laughter felt strange in this tense, quiet room. He replied in his own tongue, not sure if the human understood, but he knew the meaning would be clear enough. Then the human closed his eyes, once more resting, but not gone, never gone. In the days that followed, the human strength returned at a pace that made the nurses whisper among themselves. The wounds closed faster than their medicines could explain, and the fever that should have lingered vanished in a single cycle. Soon the man was sitting up, demanding to know what had happened and how the ship had survived. The doctor explained in simple words, and the human listened with an expression that was half gratitude and half something else, perhaps a hunger to return to the fight. But the doctor refused to release him too soon. He insisted on more scans, more tests, more time to understand this living mystery. For if one human could survive such injury, perhaps others could too. And if the secret lay in their biology or in their spirit, it might change how wars were fought. And one, the human, did not argue much, though the doctor could see the restless energy growing inside him like a storm waiting to break. On the sixth night, the doctor stood alone in the med bay looking at the chart of readings, and he felt a strange chill, for the data seemed to hint at something beyond resilience. It was as if the human's body had learned from the injury, adapting in ways no other species could, and becoming stronger. Because of it, he thought of predators that became deadlier after each battle and prey that grew faster to survive, and he wondered if humans were something far more dangerous than anyone had guessed. The hum of the ship was steady now, and outside the med bay window the stars drifted slowly past. Yet inside the doctor's mind there was no peace, only questions that demanded answers, and a growing sense that the galaxy was not ready for what humans truly were. And as the human slept under the soft light, his breathing calm, and even the doctor knew this was only the beginning of something far greater than both of them. The alien doctor stood in the cold white chamber, feeling a strange weight in the air, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath, and watching what would happen next. For the human was still lying on the medical platform, covered in faint bruises and burns, yet somehow breathing slowly and steadily, his chest rising and falling like calm waves on shore. The doctor had seen miracles before, but this was different, because this was not just survival. It was something beyond the limits of what His people believed possible for the human had endured the deadly toxin for over a full rotation, and not only was he alive, he seemed stronger somehow. The lights in the chamber flickered as the alien assistants adjusted the monitors, each one whispering in low tones for fear of disturbing whatever strange force was keeping the human alive. They had run every test in their medical archives. They had scanned every cell in his body. They had even compared his blood to the most dangerous predators in the galaxy, yet nothing explained this resistance. The toxin was designed to break down muscle, tissue, and shut down the nervous system in minutes, but here, the human lay with eyes half open as if staring into a dream. He refused to leave. The alien doctor took a step closer, feeling his own heartbeat quicken, for he remembered the moment the human had been brought in from the battlefield, broken, burned, and poisoned beyond repair. The medics had shaken their heads, saying the human would not last an hour, but he had insisted on trying everything he could, and now, a full day later, he was watching the impossible happen. The human suddenly moved his hand, just a little, but enough to make the entire room fall silent. His fingers curled weakly, and then uncurled, as if testing the weight of the air. His lips moved, too, forming silent words. The doctor leaned closer, straining to hear, for he thought the human might be speaking a final farewell. But instead he heard a faint whisper, not in the alien tongue, but in the sharp, clipped sounds of the human language. The words were simple, almost mocking. "You will have to do better than that." The doctor stepped back, startled, because he understood the meaning, even if he did not speak the human language perfectly. The message was clear. The human was telling the universe that it had not yet beaten him, and perhaps never would. One of the assistants gasped and pointed to the monitors, which now showed the human's heart rate rising, his brain activity sparking like a storm. The alien doctor realized he was witnessing the human not just surviving, but fighting back at the toxin from within, as if his body was turning the poison into something else. In the far corner of the chamber, a low alarm began to hum, a sign that the toxin levels in the human's blood were dropping far faster than any model predicted. The assistants crowded around the display in disbelief, some even checking the system for errors. But the numbers were real. The alien doctor felt a strange mix of pride and fear. Pride, because he was seeing an unmatched will to live. Fear, because if one human could do this, what would happen if all humans could? The human's eyes opened fully now, locking onto the alien doctor with a gaze that felt heavier than any weapon the doctor had ever faced. There was no anger there, no hatred, only a deep and unshakable certainty, as if the human had already calculated his odds and decided he would win. His lips moved again, this time more clearly, and the doctor could almost feel the words rather than hear them. "Not done yet." The chamber's air recyclers hissed softly as the alien doctor straightened himself and addressed the human in his own language. "You should not be alive." The human blinked slowly. Then with an effort, he lifted his head just a little and whispered back, "Maybe that is why I am the one who is here and not them." It was a simple statement, yet it carried a weight the doctor could not measure. Outside the chamber, the news of the human survival had already reached the other medical bays. Warriors from many species were gathering in the observation corridors, pressing their faces to the glass to see the creature who had done what none of them could. The alien doctor could hear their murmurs through the walls, some in awesome and fear, and some in quiet anger. For if this human could survive such a thing, then perhaps their own species were not as strong as they had believed. The doctor felt a duty now, not just as a healer, but as a witness. He needed to understand and record every moment, because this was no longer about one life. It was about a truth that would ripple across the galaxy. He turned back to the human and said, "We will need to run more tests to know how you did this." The human gave the faintest smile, which even in his weakness seemed to carry defiance, and replied, "You can test all you want, but you will never understand it unless you feel it yourself." The words puzzled the doctor, but he sensed a challenge hidden in them, perhaps even a warning. He thought of the wars his people had fought, and of the countless times they had underestimated the strange creatures from the small blue planet called Earth. He realized now that the human way of survival was not just physical, but something deeper, something in their mind and spirit that could not be measured by machines. The toxin was still in the human system, but instead of breaking him, it now seemed to be a part of him. The monitors showed that his cells were adapting, creating barriers and pathways no one had ever seen before. It was as if the human body was rewriting itself in real time. The alien doctor understood the danger of such a thing. If this ability could be shared or learned, it might change the balance of power forever. The human moved again, pushing himself up on his elbows. The assistants rushed forward to stop him, but he waved them away, his voice stronger now, as he said, "I told you I'm not done." The doctor let him sit. Because he knew stopping him would be pointless, the human looked around the chamber, as if taking in every detail, then fixed his gaze on the observation window, where dozens of alien eyes stared back. He raised his voice enough for them to hear. "Tell your people the humans are not so easy to kill." The silence that followed was heavy. No one moved, no one spoke. The alien doctor realized that the humans' words would travel far beyond this station. They would echo in council chambers and war rooms and marketplaces and training grounds and in the hearts of those who had once believed humans were fragile. The doctor finally spoke softly enough for only the human to hear. "You have changed something today." The human gave a tired nod and leaned back, closing his eyes, but still breathing steady and strong. The doctor knew that even if he never understood the full truth of what he had seen, the galaxy would never forget it. Far beyond the walls of the medical chamber, the stars continued their silent watch, unaware, or perhaps uncaring, that in this small place, a single human had just rewritten the meaning of survival.